In this video, I will show you how to install Android Studio on Linux. I'm using Fedora Linux, but you can use the same steps for installing Android Studio on other Linux distributions as well. The first thing we need to do is to go to Android Studio's website. So I open my web browser. Then I go to developer.android.com/studio. Note that there's a tab for preview. There you will find the latest preview version of Android Studio. We will install Android Studio Preview to be able to use the latest bleeding edge features of this IDE. So I select Download Arctic Fox 2020-31 Canary 8 for Linux. It automatically recognizes my system on which I'm browsing the website. I'm on Linux, so it suggests me to install the Linux version. If you want to see other versions of this IDE, for example, the Windows version or the Mac version, you can select More Downloads, and then you will be able to see all the available versions by agreeing to the terms of Android Studio. So I press I agree to the terms, and here the latest version is Canary 8, and different versions are available here: Windows, Chrome OS, Windows, Mac, Linux. First we have the installers, which are Windows and Chrome OS, and then we have zip files, which have Windows, Mac, and Linux versions. I'm gonna download the Linux version. I press the link to the zip file for Linux. This is the latest version for Linux, the latest Canary version. Then I select Save File in my browser, and then OK, and I save it in the Downloads directory. I'll have to wait until the download is complete. Currently I have hidden my downloads from the browser, but I can easily see them by going to Downloads, About, Downloads. And here it shows me the progress of downloading Android Studio. I'll have to wait until the download is complete. So I'll pause the video here and resume it once the download is done. Alright, Android Studio is downloaded and it is in my downloads directory. The next step is to go to our downloads folder and extract the Android Studio archive. So I open the downloads folder, and here we can just extract the Android Studio archive here and start using it. However, I'm going to use another method that's more suitable on Linux system. First, I'm going to launch a terminal. I'm using GNOME terminal, but you can use any terminal of your choice. I go to my downloads folder, and here I extract the IDE to my home directory. You can choose any path that you like. Alright, tar xvf, I use this command for extraction, Android Studio, and then the path to which I'm going to extract the IDE to, I extract it to the home directory. I specify that with this sign. Okay, I press enter and wait for the IDE to be extracted to user's home directory. Alright, the IDE is extracted. Now I go to my home directory and check it out. Home directory, there we go, we have Android Studio here. And if we open it and then go to the bin directory, we will find a file named studio.sh. This is the file that launches the IDE on Linux systems. And we also have two files, studio.png and studio.svg, that are the icons of the IDE in case you want to create a shortcut to the IDE. Alright, first let me show you how it is launched. I go back to my terminal and then change my path to the home directory and then Android Studio and then bin. These are the files that I just showed you in the Nautilus File Explorer. Now in order to launch the IDE, I use this command, studio.sh, and then I also add the & sign and then press enter and wait for the IDE to launch. It is starting, as you can see. There we go. The first thing that we see is that in case you have another version of Android Studio that you have installed in the past, the IDE will ask you whether you want to import the settings that you had in the previous IDE or you want to start from scratch. Since this is a tutorial, I'm gonna start from scratch to go through other steps as well. So I don't import anything and then press OK and then wait for the IDE to start. Next, it will ask me to go through the steps of setting up the SDK and downloading, if required, some components that we will need for developing Android applications. The setup wizard will validate your current Android SDK and development environment setup. You will have the option to download new Android SDKs or your existing installation. Once the setup wizard completes, you can import an existing Android app to Android Studio or start new Android project. I press next. You can go ahead with standard settings or use the custom. I'm gonna choose custom to go through some options. We have to select JRE or Java Development Kit that we will need for Android Studio to work, because Android Studio is an IDE based on Java, so it needs a JDK installation to work. And fortunately, it also has an embedded JDK inside the IDE, so that you don't need to have Java installed on your system. So I go ahead with the default settings, that is using the default embedded JDK from within Android Studio's installation folder, or you can select other version of Java if you have Java installed on your system. For example, I have several versions of Java and I have Java Home set in my path to this path, so I can select and go ahead with that. But for ease of use, I'm gonna select the first option, embedded JDK, and next. I like the dark theme, so I select dark theme and press next. Alright, the installer wizard has detected an existing Android SDK on my system, so I can go forward with that settings with that SDK, and Android Studio will have the option to only download the missing components. So I don't need to select anything because everything is installed, and total download size is 0 kilobytes. But in case you don't have Android SDK installed from before, you will have to install at least Android SDK and then Android SDK platform and a version, preferably a latest version of Android, and then also Android virtual device in order to be able to run Android applications in a virtual phone inside Android Studio. Alright, now I press next and wait for Android Studio to finish the setup. There's also a notice here about KVM, kernel-based virtual machine. Most systems nowadays have the option to run virtual devices in accelerated mode. And if you are using an Intel-based system, like what I'm doing, you will need to enable kernel-based virtual machine or KVM acceleration on your system. And the way you do it is first you enable it on your BIOS and then also install KVM packages on your system. I have already done it, but based on your Linux operating system, you can select this link, open it, and see the different steps for installing the required packages on different operating systems, whether you are using Ubuntu or Red Hat based operating systems like Fedora, or if you are using Windows. There are different detailed steps for setting that up. Alright, back to Android Studio, I press finish and the setup is done. Now our IDE is ready and we can start developing Android applications, including Jetpack Compose applications. There we go. One thing you might want to do for your Android Studio installation on Linux is to create a shortcut for your IDE so that you can easily find it from the applications and you don't have to go to the terminal each time and then cd to the directory in which you have put your Android Studio installation and then launch studio.sh and all that hassle. What we do is we create a GNOME desktop file, which is a shortcut basically to the IDE. So let's see how it works. First, we go to this directory, local share applications, and here I create a file. I name it, for example, android.desktop, and then a curly braces, angle brackets, in fact, desktop entry, and first a name for it, Android Studio. Because it's preview, I name it preview, and then type is application, and then I specify the path to its executable file. So I know that it is in this location, home, Mehdi, and then Android Studio, bin studio.sh, and then the icon, home, Mehdi, Android Studio, bin studio.png. There we go. I save the file, and soon my system will be able to index this file and know that I have an executable on my system that launches the IDE. Now I will be able to go to the list of my applications and find the IDE. By the way, you could also make this file using gedit. We don't have to do it using VI. Alright, let's go and find it in the list of our applications. Here in the search bar, I search for Android Studio. There we go. You can see that Android Studio is available and the system recognizes it. And if I click it, it will launch the IDE. Now it's much easier to access the IDE this way, and you don't have to go through finding it from within the terminal and running it from there each time. It is much more accessible. There we go, we have Android Studio.